Welcome to Mastermind, the behavioral health business podcast. We go beyond the clinical to explore what it really takes to build, grow, and lead a successful behavioral health organization. Each episode features candid, practical conversations with industry leaders, offering strategies to scale your business while staying true to your mission. From branding and marketing to leadership, culture, and compliance, we cover the tools you need to balance care and commerce with confidence. Mastermind is brought to you by Snapshot, a digital agency on a mission to serve with heart, execute with excellence, and build something bigger together. And now, welcome to Mastermind.
In this episode, we're going to be sharing some of the common problems that we're seeing in behavioral health today. And with that, it could be lack of transparency, lack of plans. It could be just any number of different things that I'm going to let Lee and Jeff elaborate on as we navigate this show. So thanks for being a part of it. With that, we'll go ahead and just kick it off. Lee, Jeff, what are some of those common problems that you're seeing in the industry when you all get brought into a situation to help?
All right, so the first thing that I'd like to do, let's just reframe this from a problem perspective, and let's talk about the opportunity for somebody to improve.
A great point, Jeff.
So when you think about it from that standpoint, it's like even the people that we work with, we want to come from a place of strength as opposed to assuming that there's a deficiency. Mm-hmm. Now, believe me, there's a deficiency. I mean, there's almost always a deficiency because by the time I get a call or by the time Lee gets a call, things aren't going great. Okay? Right, Lee?
Yeah, I think we're probably the second or third. They finally decided, okay, we've got to bring in a little bit more expertise.
So sometimes they have a little difficulty figuring out what their strengths are. And I would even start off with that is like sometimes they are so lost in the weeds in terms of what other people have told them or different journeys or different paths that they're on. They don't even know what makes them special. So I would even start from a standpoint of I often come in and just say, let's just redefine what marketing is. Marketing for you, marketing for anybody is what is your place in this space? What do you offer that is unique? And then how do you want to tell that story? And even just reframing from that is a lot of times very illuminating. And there's a light bulb that goes on that just says, oh, wait, we've really never done that work. Mm-hmm. And they've let tactics get in front of their own story. So, what would you say to that?
Well, yeah, Jeff, I think, to start with, when I first go on site, I hear a lot about good intentions. And good intentions don't necessarily equate to successful outcomes.
Right.
And so I think that, what we try to approach is that we let the data be the bad guy. Everybody may be working really hard, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right kind of work. And so I think we have to kind of take a step back, and like Jeff was alluding to, we have to really get into what exactly is marketing. And so having all these different disparate data points that we insist that we have to bring into the conversation. Because most of the problems relate around census. That's when the phone starts ringing for Jeff and I. Census is down or projected to be down. Well, your census problem started 6 months ago.
Right.
And so we have to really reframe that conversation and educate our clients as to what their real opportunities are. There's a great quote that I reference and I include in my book from Chris Grosser that opportunities don't happen, you create them. And I think for a lot of our clients, we bring to them what are these opportunities that they can achieve, because some of the things that they might be working on or being exposed to are really outside of what they really can do. And it's a question of kind of just, hey, let's reframe this, let's simplify, and that can allow our class to be successful.
Yeah, I love how you guys reframe that to the opportunity that they have. And we see a very similar thing. And, what I took away from just this very first discussion is just having a strategy around the entire marketing plan that's really going to drive the initiatives that they want. And most of the time it's, driving in for that census so that they can bring in more patients into their programs. And what we typically see is going to be they have the data. The data is just in maybe 15 different places, and they don't really know how to pull all that data together and look at it to make it very meaningful to where they're heading as a program. So can you guys, lean into that a little bit more? You probably see it even on a bigger scale.
Sure. One thing that I would add, and I think you've alluded to it already, is that in every engagement, there's always a gap. Okay, there's a gap in terms of who the client thinks they are and who they actually are. Mm-hmm. And then, like Lee said, the data will tell them, but there's usually a gap in terms of their data collection. There's usually a gap in terms of, the tools that they can use to actually navigate. So think about it like flying a plane. They may not have the right gauges. They may not even be looking at the right things. So part of what I do and part of what Lee does and part of what Snapshot does is help them find what those gaps are. Because a lot of times, all they know is what they know. And part of what we can do is bring some additional knowledge and context so that they can actually see what's possible for them. Mm-hmm. And then when Lee talks about the data, that's a perfect example. Yes, it may be in 15 different buckets, but let's assume they know what those buckets are. Does that mean they know what to do and what that data is telling them? Does that, do they know what the next right step is? Oftentimes, no, they don't.
Sure.
Back in the day, Mark, I remember, I think it was the guys at Sterling, Capital that were our original sponsors at Foundations, and then eventually the Pritzkers. They used to refer to me as, Lee's the web guy. And I would always kind of smile because, okay, web's part of it, but I'm really a data guy. And I think that when I get called in, and I think Jeff has the same experience, I'm not going in with just my binoculars on the internet, just on their web strategy, because that's where I think sometimes that programs fall into the tactics instead of we have to back it up and get with the strategy, because it may be that your problem has nothing to do with the internet. It could be a problem with maybe you lack an alumni program, or maybe you lack a business development program, or maybe your admissions team needs some training. I mean, there's so many things that you have to kind of analyze.
Or they're not integrated or coordinated. It's like
Absolutely.
You may have these various verticals that are working in silos as opposed to sort of an integrated approach that fits within a larger marketing strategy. That's another thing that I see consistently is that they're not singing in unison. We've got 3 different melodies and there's no harmony.
Yeah.
And and that's what ends up happening too, is because they're paying for these silos. And so your alumni silo is here, and it's got a cost, and your BD. Whereas if you do integrate them, as you said, Jeff, and bring them in, that's where you get what I call force multiplication. And that has a really positive impact to your budget. Instead of having to do these 4 or 5 things and paying for them 4 or 5 times, you can multiply that impact and really start to get some leverage and some scale, which we all talk about leverage and scale, and it's a great buzzword, but how do you do it?
Yeah.
And I think that there's real opportunities where simplicity can help programs actually do that.
Yeah, and you guys, I mean, you're both 2 of the most sought after strategists and consultants in this industry. And, we really appreciate all your thoughts and advice on this show. But, just even taking it back, what I heard from you all at the very beginning is that you get brought in at a certain point. And, what I hear from time to time is just knowing who to trust. And it really starts at the beginning of, some of these clients that you work with have been mistreated. And maybe you guys can talk about that, of how do you build that trust with the program so that they know, hey, here's everything we're going to do for you and why it's going to matter.
Well, I think that's a really insightful question. And the way that I try to do that is I try to relate it back to their business. And what I mean by that is they are in the business of helping people live more powerful lives. And a lot of times they'll understand this language to say that, many programs will focus on treating symptoms as opposed to the underlying cause. And they know that addressing an underlying cause or a root issue is what creates a transformation in one of their clients or one of their patients. So I like to start from a standpoint of saying, well, let's look at your business that same way. And look at it and just say, what you're doing, you're addressing symptoms. When there's an opportunity here to really go after what is the underlying cause of these symptoms, and then that's where you really can change the game. I found that to be really relatable because they understand the business that they provide. They don't always understand how marketing can be operating in sort of a holistic sphere like that as well. That's usually a level setting conversation that is pretty healthy, and it really says, this is not just some huckster who's selling me something. This is someone who actually understands the people that we treat, and there's a higher calling in terms of making a difference and making an impact.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think the trust word is really big. I think from my perspective, when I come in to assist someone, I let them know from the very beginning that I am not an occupying force, I'm a liberating force. And so one of the examples that I talk about in my book is commander's intent. And, Jeff and I, we can be at this level where sometimes people view us as like CMOs or fractional CMOs, and that's fine. But guess what? We're not necessarily doing all the grunt work, so to speak. And so when I was in the Army as a young man, I was a lieutenant, armor officer. It's the lieutenants, it's the platoon level that's doing the work. And sometimes we get confused about, everything is happening up at the battalion level or the brigade level. And no, the work is actually being done, at the platoon and company level. And so that's where I have to educate my clients to make sure they understand that I'm going to come in and help you with strategy, and we're going to be able to make some really good decisions. But if I can't lean into your people, if I can't get them motivated and get them trained up, then it's just going to be a one and done, and it's not repeatable. And so what Jeff and I try to do with our clients is to make sure that any processes and procedures we're putting into place are repeatable. So when we leave in a few months or a year, then great, you guys are off and flying. And it's that investment in their staff that I think sometimes people are missing.
Yeah, I love that analogy, and let's just stick with it. I mean, if you're going to be successful in any of these plans, there needs to be a unified understanding of the mission. And that's exactly what Lee is talking about. And oftentimes there's a real disconnect. There's a real disconnect from what the ownership or the C-suite has in terms of a vision, and then what the people who are actually doing the work, taking the phone calls. It's like understanding why we're doing what we're doing, and then how we're actually different in the market. And so even just the harmonization or the synchronization of that message in multiple levels of an organization, that is a massive that's a lever, that's a massive moving function that can make a difference in an organization. And I can't tell you how many times people don't think about that, or that communication line is broken, or there's an opportunity to rethink the whole mission, and it can change the trajectory of an organization.
Yeah. Wow, guys. That's it's amazing feedback. Good thoughts on that. I think, I love I'm a liberating force and not an occupying force, because I do think that's prevalent out in the industry, and you see that where, you give just enough so that you can always stay engaged versus really freeing them to do it on their own. And most of the time you probably see that, hey, even though they can do it on their own, they still trust you so much that they want you involved at some level. It may be less than what you were at the beginning, but
well, I appreciate that. And it's like, I got a call just last week from an organization that was literally held hostage by a marketing organization.
Wow.
And they felt helpless, hopeless, and they felt like, oh my gosh, what can we possibly do? And I was like, well, first of all, it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
It doesn't. And in the real world, if you will, where it's like, this is where my experience and Lee's experience of working outside of this industry, that game wouldn't last long in any other vertical, in any other sector, in any other space, because those kinds of businesses, agencies, whatever, would cease to exist. And so I just can't even think to operate that way. So it's like open, transparent, and give people the tools to be successful for themselves. And like you said, that's got its own magnetic force. You do the right things, people will magnetically want to stick with you, as opposed to holding someone hostage because like you've got something and you've got the keys and you're not sharing.
Yeah, I love it, Jeff. Well, just to lean into that a little bit more and about, being held hostage. You all see it a lot in this industry. You see good agencies, you see great agencies, and you see some really poorly ran agencies out there, or doing, maybe not poorly ran, just doing a poor job for their clients. And maybe you guys could just say like, hey, what are some of the common problems you see with bad agencies, good agencies, and maybe even...
I can tell you the first thing, when I come on site, I think this has been 100% of my clients that I've worked with over the last 4 years. when I get there, one of the first questions I will ask is, when was the last time your agency was on site with you? And I am always amazed that, 6 months, a year, a couple years ago when we signed the contract. And I'm like, wow, how can that be? I mean, this is a partner, right? This is somebody that is eating and breathing and living and dying with you, and they're not in your space, because this is where, again, they get back to, a lot of times we look at this as, we're going to hire tactics, and they're totally missing out on the opportunity that, no, they have to educate the agency, right? As much as the agency is going to educate them on digital marketing, they've got to educate the agency on what their model is, what their approach to treatment is. And it just cannot be done if it's remote. And that's the very first thing. And as soon as they tell me, when I hear 6 months, a year, 2 years, I know, wow, that there is a huge opportunity to come in and improve the situation.
Well, I mean, if you think about it and just pull the camera back a little bit and take a look at the bigger picture, I mean, they're in the business of creating a healthy ecosystem. They're in the business of community. They're in the business of healthy relationships. I mean, this is a people business, right? And so why wouldn't you expect that from the people that you work with? Why wouldn't you expect that from your business partners? Why wouldn't you expect a healthy ecosystem, a healthy communication system? You should, you could, but they don't. And I think that's a huge miss. And I think to Lee's point, even just addressing it from that standpoint in terms of what does a healthy relationship look like, being present is huge. And understanding their needs, and then understanding their goals, their objectives, and what worries them when they go to sleep at night. It's like just being there, being present. And the fact that, as Lee points out, and I've seen this as well, they've made a decision to outsource, and they just think that it's just magically going to get done, and that is not a healthy relationship.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, because I think, just some treatment programs, they just don't know what they don't know. And having you all swoop in and help them out probably opens their eyes to a lot of things. I mean, from just even transparency and having the data right there for them, to just even having a plan, like where are we going for the next 3 years? Not just where are we going next quarter, but it's like having a plan of looking out in the future and saying in 3 years we'll be here, and what are all those things that we have to do in order to get there. And I'm sure that's what you bring to the table and work with some of these agencies that you're working with.
Well, Mark, I was going to say, you've been on the other side of where I've had clients that have gone through a process of looking for a new agency, and you guys have responded, a few times with me. And I think that's one of the things that I'm also, when I ask my clients, well, can you show me what the RFP was that you prepared for the prior agency? Oh, we didn't create an RFP. And so part of that is that is so unbelievable to me, coming from outside of the behavioral health space. I worked for many years in digital music, and then I worked for many years in IT. And wow, we had RFPs for everything, because we needed to define what it is that we were expecting, and then we would go out. And so part of it is that's the second thing. When they tell me there's been no RFP, but they just chose this agency because somebody told me they were good, now I know, okay, there's a trust opportunity there. It's a huge opportunity. And then I wanted to say that the third thing that I will ask is about training. And I'm always surprised that we will make sure that our clinical team is trained. We'll make sure that our accounting team is trained. But then your digital marketing folks, your business development, your admissions team, they're not trained. And the response I will get is, well, I hired them because
they just know what they're doing.
I thought they knew. Yeah. I'm not a web developer. And what's so funny is web development is such a small piece of the whole pie.
Right.
But when I see that they're not investing hard dollars in making sure that their staff, even their junior staff, are being trained and they're being held accountable for maintaining their certifications, I know there's another opportunity there. And we haven't even touched the strategy of how you go out and build a business development team or an admissions team or a web marketing team. Like now we're talking about some basic infrastructure, and that's what will propel companies to making sure these processes are repeatable.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Lee's saying. And then, we've spoken earlier about gaps that we identify, right? This is a perfect example where oftentimes leaders, owners, C-suite executives, when it comes to their marketing efforts, when it comes to their business development efforts, there's a giant blind spot around this because let's face it, most people who own and start programs like this, that's not their wheelhouse, right? And that's totally fair. I find it to be most helpful when they're open to that feedback and they're open to actually hearing about these gaps. And to Lee's point, they don't see the value in training them because they think that they come in with history, with experience, and they should just know what to do. And the reality of it is that's where trouble begins. So, I mean...
Well, and not to date us, but Jeff and I, we graduated college before the internet. So how is it that two guys who wrote our college thesis and essays on typewriters, how is it that we're now the digital marketing guys? You know, and it's an intentionality that for training and staying up with the times. And so
how about Yellow Pages? You remember those days when the Yellow Pages? I'm sure some in the audience may not even remember having Yellow Pages and those big, thick phone books that you actually put in the seats so you could sit up a little higher with your parents.
I really appreciate Lee bringing back the typewriter days. That's a really
and I even had a typewriter that my parents bought me when I graduated high school that had the auto correction.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah, that was fancy.
Yeah,
and I think they got it at Sears.
It's like liquid paper, the original AI.
Yeah. But seriously, how? I mean, you got to ask yourself that. Like, how are all? I mean, we work with a lot of young people, and I love working. People always want to criticize millennials, but I love working with them, and they're looking at us as like these experts. And I'm like, it's not that we're necessarily expert in any one technology. Right? We're experts in let's build this strategy because the tactics and the technology changes over time. Yeah. Right? You've got to have the right systems in place to make sure that you're riding that wave appropriately.
We see it as well. I mean, the strategy is going to guide all the marketing tactics that we're going to go do. And also think, just leaning into the transparency. I mean, something that I'm always taken back by is just when we get involved and we ask, like, let's look at the numbers, let's look at the data, where's your dashboard, what are you looking at? And for many of them, like, they don't even have a dashboard. They don't really know the numbers that are driving the business because what they've heard is really like the vanity metrics of the past, which is like website traffic or even like, the call volumes. And it's like, really, what's the dashboard that's going to show you the conversions that you're getting? And not only that, but you're able to track it all the way through their CRM if they have one, which many times they might not. But let's get them implemented with a CRM so that we can track it all the way through to where they become a patient. Now we know, we spent $1 and it returned X. And that's what I think, that transparency that most of them that we get involved with are really missing. And it's just it's an easy thing these days with having great dashboards and great analytics and being able to pull it all together in one place that's real time all the time so they can look at it on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis if their agency isn't like having a weekly call or a monthly call with them, which Lee, you made a great point of just being there, being on site. I mean, and that could be going on site is definitely important, but even having a face-to-face with them to really build that trust and to, I feel like in our role, it's a lot of times it's education on what they should be looking for. And they know that, hey, Snapshot is looking out for my best interests. They know my numbers as well as I do. And but it's just having that weekly or biweekly call that we have that builds so much trust. And I think that goes back to being either a good agency or a great agency is just having those repeatable times to meet with our clients.
If you don't mind, I'm going to jump off your diving board into kind of a deeper pool here. What you painted in the picture is utopia, okay? And that is what we're shooting for, and then some people are further along that path than others. But let's talk about why they got into the deep water to begin with, okay? And I think it boils down to something very simple. If you don't know, or if you're unsure, or you've lacked confidence in a certain area, it's human nature to look at what other people are doing. It's human nature to phone your peers and just say, hey, what are you guys doing about this? And then it turns into this FOMO energy, this fear of missing out. And so all of a sudden, this rumor starts, or this chatter starts around what one organization is doing, and it's going great for them, and well, why aren't we doing that? And so then it's just driven by a FOMO. And what I'd like to point out is that I go back to everyone needs an individualized marketing strategy, not a strategy that works for just anyone else, one of your peers or someone. So before we even get to data and dashboards, we need to have clarity in terms of, are you being driven by chatter and rumor and FOMO, or, okay, hang on for the pun here because it's coming.
Yeah.
All right. So it's like, are you being driven by FOMO, or do you have a strategy that works faux me?
That's a good one, Jeff.
So think about that. When it comes to an individualized strategy, how many times have you heard, like in your life and other domains, it's like when you go see a doctor, you don't want to get a strategy that works for just the general population. Mm-hmm. When you want to think about a financial plan, you don't want just any old strategy. You want something that is specifically tailored for you and for your needs and for your goals. And once you can establish that, then we can start moving in towards the data utopia that you're describing, because those steps are pretty straightforward and actually easy to manage. But I think, before we even get there, Mark, I think we need to be honest and realize that this is the motivation for a lot of the reasons that Lee and I get these calls.
Yeah. So, what I just heard is maybe just more of like most of the time, like you're seeing like a cookie cutter approach that's just scaled across all the programs. And it's just, it doesn't work.
One program is doing this, therefore 5 other programs are going to do that, whether it makes sense for them or not.
Templates kill me, especially in paid search. I've reviewed so many of my clients' paid search strategies, and they're all, a lot of them, when I get the call, they're the same. I'm like, oh my gosh, who's sharing spreadsheets around here? But it's really amazing that they don't think about the customization, piece of it, because most of my clients, their programs are very individualized and tailored. They're not looking for just the generic client, right? They've got very specific people that they want in their milieu. So why wouldn't they approach their marketing that way, or their keyword strategy? And it's because they don't know what they don't know.
Correct.
And I think the FOMO thing, oh my gosh, if I get asked again, how can we start doing TikTok? Listen, I'm not against TikTok. It works for some of my clients, but it's just because client A is doing it doesn't mean that you need to do it. And there's a process for approaching it the right way. And podcast is similar. I can't tell you how many times people will call and say, I need to do a podcast. Okay, well, that's great. I love podcasts. But, there's a process. There's the quality of the like the podcast is just, that's the easy part. It's writing the content strategy for your podcast.
Yeah.
Is it going to be serialized? Is it going to be journalistic? There's so many other questions to ask. And all of a sudden, when I start bringing this up, they're like blown away. It's like studio and mics
and Lee, what if? Again, it's like let's just start from a simple question. It's like, how does this help your business? And does this actually put you on a path to being successful in your vision, your definition of success? Sometimes it's even a question of they may or not. In this realm, they may not have really done the work to say, what does success look like? And what are the metrics that we're going to use to judge success? Chances are they have on the clinical side. Chances are they've got a very good idea in terms of what measures success in terms of outcomes and how they want to approach things from a clinical perspective. I just invite them, encourage them to bring that same sort of curiosity to the marketing side and then engage with professionals that can help them get there.
Wow, that's very good. Yeah. I think just for the audience's benefit, like we've talked a lot about, strategy versus tactics. And, like one thing that I've always noticed from both of you all is that, like what are the easy, low-hanging fruit things that we can go do to, just knock out so that like we can start to build that foundation of the strategy to start executing some of the harder tactics. Like, you brought up the podcast, and everybody thinks they need to do one, but it comes down to then you've got to go execute on it. And then it's like every week it's got to happen, or every other week we're going to be launching an episode, or it's just going to fade away, or why even do it is what we tell clients. And so maybe if we could lean into this for just a second and talk about like the difference between strategy and execution for just our audience's benefit.
Well, I'll start with an analogy, and then I'll be really curious to see where Lee takes this.
Okay.
How's
Awesome.
that? I'm going to start with an analogy, and if he doesn't like it, we'll choose something else. I like to tell people, and this is not brand new, but a lot of people don't think about this from a marketing perspective. If we started on a road trip, and let's say that we wanted to get to Seattle, I'm just going to choose Seattle just for the heck of it, and we just start driving, but we don't have a road map, we generally know how we're going to drive our car. We're going to drive until we get hungry, and then we're going to drive until we get sleepy, and then we're going to find some place, and then the next day we're going to rinse and repeat. And if we don't have a roadmap in mind, and if we don't have a timeline in mind, and if we don't have milestones we're trying to hit, then you might get to Seattle, but chances are you're going to blow your budget, and chances are you're going to maybe end up in some areas that you wish you hadn't. Chances are you're going to run into some individuals that you wish you hadn't. And you might have some great stories, but I don't know that you chalk it up to be a successful road trip. So I view that as tactics. And I think before you even engage in a road trip like that, I think you need to take a step back and just say, why are we even doing this? Mm-hmm. And then what car are we going to drive? And then just start asking questions before you even get in the vehicle. That's, to me, the difference between strategy and tactics. So, I mean, just very simply stated. So, Lee, where would you take that?
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy, Jeff. Sticking with the podcast theme, since we're on a podcast, when somebody
very meta.
Right, when somebody comes to me and talks about a podcast, you have to take a step back, and this is where because podcast is the tactic, you have to go back to the strategy. And if your strategy is, well, I'm a new program, or I'm adding a program, to my current program, and I don't have time maybe to seed SEO as an example, or I don't have an alumni base to pull from. Now we can say the strategy should be business development. We're going to work on business development, and part of the lead into business development may be we create a podcast so that you can invite the community in. That's how you would get to a podcast, is from an overall marketing strategy versus calling you or me or Jeff and saying, I want to do a podcast. Like, it's putting the tactic before we understand like really where the strategy should be, if that helps. And I think that fits in kind of with the road trip analogy too.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point, guys. Thanks for breaking that down. I just think that's super helpful because we talk about it, strategic versus tactical, a lot.
I will bet you 9 times out of 10 when someone speaks to you about a marketing idea or a marketing plan, 9 times out of 10 they're speaking of tactics. And that's okay. That's okay, because that's the way most people are introduced to this. Is that they're introduced to, it's social media, or it's SEO, or it's it's all these various things, and it's like, okay, that's fine, but part of our job is to educate them. Part of our job is to say, I see where you're coming from. Let's see how that fits into a larger picture.
And I think this is where getting to wrap this episode up with trust. This is where you have to have the right partners, because if an agency, if a provider just calls an agency and says, I want to do a podcast, 99% of the time they'll go, yeah, we can help you produce a podcast. But you have to have the right people to say, great, love the energy around a podcast, but we need to back it up a step to understand what are you really trying to drive at. Because otherwise, we're all going to be getting lots of questions and phone calls about what's going on with census or leads, and maybe the podcast wasn't designed to do that, and they just didn't understand.
Right, and the next thing you know, that agency that said, yeah, we'll do a podcast, is now being like, well, I can't believe they took my money and we got no results.
You see that?
Was that your Bill Murray imitation? That was pretty good.
Was that pretty good?
I like that.
I'm going to do Take Me Out to the Ball Game here in just a moment. How was that?
Well, I don't want to leave this episode without talking a little bit more. Lee, you mentioned your book early on, and maybe you could just break it down like in a minute. Just tell the audience a little bit about your book and why you wrote it, and then I'd like to take it from that to go into a little lightning round. But before we wrap it up, please tell us about your book.
Thank you, Mark. It's called Never Outmatched. It is coming out September 2nd, and it's being published by Forefront Books here in Nashville, and it will be available everywhere that books are sold. I think this has been something that I've been working on for many, many years. And the idea around never outmatch is that I am taking strategies that I learned when I was a young officer in the Army, and I applied them to the corporate world, into marketing in general. And it all gets back to strategy. We can talk about all these tactics all day long, and lots of different tactics will work. But if we don't have this overarching strategy, then it's not going to work. And so I try to give young marketers and even CEOs and CFOs some of the language and breaking down so that marketing is not just this mysterious black box, right? That there really is a lot of opportunity if you can understand it and approach it in a different way. So I use these military strategies. Corporations are only about 400 years old, and we always go back to like diving into this, but military strategies are thousands of years old. And so that's what I have leaned on in my career, are these fundamental, foundational military strategies that have worked.
That's awesome. Well, thanks for giving us an update on it. And I'm sure we'll talk about it more in later episodes, but thanks for sharing
Absolutely.
that.
Thank you.
And we're really excited for you to have this book come out, and I'm sure we'll give some out to some of our audience members. So really appreciate you breaking that down. Let's leave this and let's go right into the lightning round to wrap this episode up. But maybe just, what are 3 questions that programs should be asking their current agency, as they try to understand marketing a little bit better?
Do you want me to go first?
Yeah, go.
Okay. So my 3 are the first thing that I want to know is, how is my data connected to your data?
Okay.
So if I'm the treatment center, I want to make sure that my admissions, my leads, my assessments, I want to make sure they're connected to some of these vanity metrics that we hear. Vanity metrics can be okay, but only if they're connected. They have to be connected. There's so many different tools and APIs, even if you have to go into a Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. There are ways to connect it so they're meaningful. And that's really important for both the agency and the provider. And then I want to make sure that, how can I see this data, these connection points daily? Like, there's lots of tools so that we can understand like what is going on a daily basis. We just don't need to wait till the bill shows up, right, at the end of the month. Like, there's opportunities for us to understand, and that's going to be just as important for the treatment center staff as it is for the agency owner. And then I think the third thing, which is kind of counterintuitive, I want to simplify. People get shocked when I say, I don't need more phone calls. I need less but better qualified phone calls, because that helps take the noise out of a lot of things going on. So I want to know, how can we simplify? We'll build back later on success, but we don't need to be doing everything everywhere right now in the beginning.
That's great points.
All right, so here's a question that if I owned a program and I was engaged with an agency, I would ask the agency, can you describe my ideal client? How can we find that person, and are we currently doing it? You'd be shocked how many people are like, but when it comes right down to it, it's like, that is what we're seeking. That is what we're trying to bring into a program, and it is different for every organization, or at least it should be. So if you're doing this right, you should have a very clear idea of what that ideal client is and how we're going about seeking them. And then, like, the bonus version of that is, how are you telling our story to that client? What can you tell me back the story that client should hear in their head? That's super powerful if you've got an agency that can do both of those things. And to Lee's point about simplifying, what I just said is actually very high level thinking, but you'll know if your agency's on point if they could explain it to this level of simplicity that I am right now. And if they can explain it in a way that everyone understands, then boom, that they're on point.
And Jeff does a good job around these customer personas, because if you think about the next time, if you still go to a mall, the next time you're walking through a mall, every one of those stores have a different customer profile, a different persona they're going after.
Yeah.
But think about your treatment center. Most people I deal with, they're just going after everything, everybody, everything, instead of really taking a little bit of time to understand, like, who is their ideal customer persona. Yeah.
Man, that is so good, guys.
I mean, listen, there's a place in the market for Big Lots, and there's a place in the market for Hermes. There is. And it's like, I'm not making a judgment one way or the other. It's like, there's a reason both exist. And so.
And both can be successful.
So, but you need to understand where your place is in the market, and then who you're seeking, and then why it works. So I'm not trying to make any sort of stratification other than to make the point that you need to know your market and you need to understand how you're reaching it.
Yeah, man, thank you guys for such insights today on today's episode. Just what great information, I think usable like tactics, some great next steps for programs out there to go use and implement. And I know you all will be there should anybody have any questions. And I think, I would just encourage the audience to leave us a comment. If there's something that you heard today that maybe you have a question about, it could become a next episode. It could be a piece of data that we're able to drop into the comments or into a landing page that we can share. Because, that whole purpose of this show is how do we share the best practices with programs across the country. So,
yeah, I would just add to that is like we definitely want to hear from people. And our objective here is how can we make everybody better? Because there is such a demand and such a need for the programs that we serve.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is not something about like we have all the gold and we're going to sit on it. This is about sharing it, and this is about opening up the treasure chest, if you will, and then making everybody better.
Yeah. So let's just wrap this one up, and I just think on next week's episode we'll be focusing on data, what's important and what's misinterpreted, as well as the bigger picture strategy that we often see missed. Thank you all for joining this week's episode of Mastermind Podcast.
That wraps up this episode of Mastermind. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, Mastermind is not just a podcast, it's a community. So don't forget to comment, subscribe, and review us. Your feedback helps us continue to bring you content that's relevant and relatable. Thanks again to our sponsor, Snapshot, a digital media marketing agency. And thank you for joining us on Mastermind, your behavioral health playbook.